Ever since Ark 2 was announced back in 2020, Jesus Christ, 2 years, the fans of this massive survival game have been eagerly waiting for any sort of information regarding the sequel. And on June 12, 2022, after a very short cinematic trailer, we finally got some very juicy info from the devs themselves with a brand new Ark 2 Steam page and a personal letter from the founders of Wildcard. Despite us not getting any actual footage just yet, the Steam page alone showcases many new features and changes the sequel will have when it launches next year. But how much different will the game be compared to Ark? Do they have a brand new vision for Ark 2, or is it just a one-to-one upgrade? With all the new information gathered last week, we will be able to determine how drastic the changes will be. So sit back and enjoy while we discover Wildcard's new vision for the sequel. Ark 1 was a complete mess. A game made in 7 months not only is a ginormous challenge to take, it's also impossible to do it right on this game's scale. Absolutely abhorrent performance, latency issues, constant game-breaking bugs, unpolished and simplistic combat, broken AI, numerous exploits. Not only the performance and mechanical issues were prevalent, the game's philosophy and vision were all over the place. We started in the dinosaur island fighting each other with clubs and sticks, to a few DLCs later wearing a spacesuit fighting a giant tentacle monster with mech and space whales shooting laser beams in a giant spaceship on the other side of the galaxy. Suffice to say that it wasn't what we were expecting. This drastic change in the game's theme and sometimes even core gameplay mechanics disappointed a significant portion of the player base that bought the game back in 2015. But the final nail in the coffin was the astronomical level of toxicity not only present in the game, but even promoted through its mechanics, being official servers the place where that was the most predominant. PvP on Ark is by far the most toxic in the entire genre, and that's quite an achievement since we have games like Rust and Conan Exiles to compare with. With the shooting mechanics being laggy and inconsistent, as well as a very skillless combat system, fights on Ark are mostly a matter of numbers. The level of your dino, how many dinos you have, how many people your tribe has, it's all about the numbers. This very quickly snowballs with the biggest tribes completely dominating servers and annihilating everyone regardless if they are competition or not. This issue is emphasized even further with the existence of server clusters, meaning that even if your specific server doesn't have much conflict going on, a mega tribe from a random server can simply appear overnight and utterly level the entire map for practically no reason sometimes. Obviously this is a survival game we are talking about, and despite this being a very unpleasant occurrence, it's part of the genre's experience and should be expected. However, this issue is especially severe on Ark for two simple reasons: time and resources. The game is ridiculously time-consuming, especially if we compare to other titles in the genre. In vanilla, all craftable materials like recipes, weaponry, and building structures require an insane amount of resources in relation to the player's gathering rate. That and most advanced items usually require a chain of resources to be made, sometimes including other craftables on top of it. This slows down players' progress immensely, and becomes even slower the fewer members the tribe has. Another very time-consuming aspect of the game is taming. Low-tier creatures are relatively quick to tame, but the higher the tier of the animal is, the longer it takes. Some taking up to 15 hours to tame before the devs nerfed it to make it more bearable. All this insane amount of time and effort generates investment from the player. Investment that can be cleansed from the face of the earth in a couple of seconds. Most people, even survival game fans, can't handle this amount of frustration. And we should not have to. This is bad design. Risk and challenge is at the core of the genre's experience. But too much risk and too much frustration will repel most of the game's population. leaving only the most hardcore of players by themselves, gatekeeping the PvP atmosphere with even more extreme toxicity. This is unhealthy for the game's longevity and discourages newcomers from engaging with the entirety of what ARK has to offer, and wildcard knows this, so much so that many of the new features coming with the sequel directly address all the issues I just presented. And with this out of the way, now is a good time to start thinking at what ARK 2 will offer us. Despite they mentioning many features and mechanics across many aspects of the game, ARK's sequel seems to specially focus on the issues the first title had in the past, and those are PvE, performance, thank God for that, and customization. Performance is a no-brainer. That was, and still is, the #1 issue the game suffers from, so fixing this issue is more than logical. General customization is also very important. ARK 1 had a horrifyingly severe case of power creep when it comes to tames. The building system is terrible, and tech creates a massive power gap between the tribes that don't possess such technology, so improving on the player's customization both aesthetically and mechanically, as well as limiting the technology tier to mostly primitive, will diminish the power discrepancy between large and smaller groups of players and promote mechanical specialization, which in theory will create more fair, balanced, and overall enjoyable conflicts. But why PvE though? This one is definitely the aspect wildcard is focusing the most, and requires a lot more explanation. Let's go back a bit. ARK was a major success. Over the years, millions upon millions of players tried the mysterious worlds of this dinosaur survival game. But even though all games' population naturally declines over time, even with continuous updates, ARK's average player count on every given day is around 45,000 people. But that doesn't sound bad at all. Those are actually good numbers. But when we compare it to the amount of sales, 45k is a measly 0.3% of the ARK's total population. That's an insane amount of lost players. And I believe that the vast majority abandoned the game not only because of its horrible performance and ridiculous grind, but also because of the heavy lack of PvE elements and extremely harsh and toxic PvP. Player versus environment content requires a lot more time and resources to be developed and a much more deeper level of complexity in its mechanics for it to be enjoyable in comparison to PvP. When it comes to player versus player, the players themselves are the content. And even though that's more engaging than the former for most people, it's not as long-lasting as the latter and heavily player-based dependent. The lesser the population, the less player-focused content the game has. And seeing this huge decline in player numbers, wildcard knew that ARK's sequel needed to fix the game's major issues in order to keep a much larger player retention. Their solution was to focus the game around PvE. By focusing on that type of content, the portion of the player base that dislikes player versus player gameplay will have more mechanics and features to enjoy and keep them playing, and the hardcore PvPers will even be benefited due to the deeper, more thought-out mechanics needed for the player versus environment side of the game to function properly. But what are they changing exactly? For a start, a big change right out of the gate is making the game third-person only. This changes a lot more aspects of the game than you might think. Without the presence of a first-person camera, the UI needs to be completely changed and restructured in order to give the player better visibility, since now a significant portion of the camera is obstructed by the player's character. Visual cues also need to be more vibrant and larger to become more easily noticeable. But while this change seems to turn things more complicated, it actually benefits other major changes: movement and combat. With the ability to mantle, free climb, and slide, first-person perspective would disorient the majority of players, and while the animations would be in motion, the player would be less self-aware of its surroundings due to the camera being locked in said animation. With a third-person camera, that issue is removed. And combat is being completely remade from scratch for the sequel, featuring many mechanics present in Souls games. The focus on primitive, melee combat is much different than the projectile-based combat in ARK 1, and having a first-person camera just wouldn't work. Changing the view to third person is not a proactive choice from the developers, but a necessary change in order for these features to work properly. This type of combat is much slower and promotes player skill, something that Ark's PvP scene was severely lacking. In the sequel, even if a player is outnumbered or outclassed, the existence of a skill curve in the game's combat mechanics will give skillful players a chance to come out victorious despite being in a disadvantage. The new form of combat will also affect the player's aims, with locational damage and physics-based attacks. With all of this combined, player versus player gameplay will be a much more methodical and skill-dependent experience, even in larger numbers. Skill-based combat not only makes player conflict more engaging and visually appealing, but also give people the opportunity to outmatch their opponents through their combat knowledge and ability, which in turn will discourage griefers and harassers, and as a consequence, the level of toxicity will decrease. These new mechanics are part of a much broader vision for the sequel, a focus on PvE content. Not only movement and combat are being totally redone, Wildcard is adding heavy features that improve the player versus environment experience. For one, creature AI is getting an overhaul. Dinosaurs will possess vision radius and will be able to track players and other creatures through sight, audio, and scent. Players will also have the capability to disguise themselves or mask their scent to accommodate these changes. Pathfinding will be vastly improved, thank God for that too, with creatures being able to traverse through obstacles with ease, including player-built structures. And finally, a new management system for animals has been confirmed. Not sure what that means exactly, but hopefully a more interactive and bonding taming system is part of it. And speaking of animals, we know that both creatures from Arc 1 and a rat's native fauna will be part of the roster, meaning that we will have tameable alien life forms alongside dinosaurs. In the last few seconds of Arc 2's latest trailer, we can see the silhouettes of some of them. Rex, Raptor, Dodo, Para, Enki, Trike, Terra, Quetz, Bronto, Stego, as well as this strange theropod that could be either Ceratosaurus or one of a rat's alien predators. And also this big boy that resembles one of the titans from Extinction DLC, but might as well be from a rat too. Secondly, a unique AI-based faction will be introduced in the sequel. The Aratai? Moving on. These NPCs are hostile towards players and will attack on sight. Aratai will possess their own tames and possibly their own villages, and will periodically raid players' bases, among other things. This will, in turn, create dynamic encounters and PvE situations, adding a whole new component of the game's loop that the player base needs to consider throughout their journey. And third, real-time world events will add an extra layer of complexity and randomness to the average player experience. These events will be unique, optional challenges that will appear randomly throughout the map in real time, meaning that regardless if there are players around, those events will still occur, and it's up to the player to engage with them or not. Some examples mentioned were watering hole gatherings, wounded creatures, tracking the signs of advanced prey, stampedes, herds, protecting endangered creatures to earn their trust, and finding dens of parent creatures and their young. These challenges will offer unique rewards which we don't know yet, but by the sound of some of them, some specific creatures won't be available outside of the events themselves, or they are not tameable outside of these events, giving players extra challenges that not always include combat. Customization is being scaled up to include many aspects of the core gameplay experience. In Arc 2, equipment will have a modular system, where each weapon and tool will be divided into separate parts. Each part can be made of several resources, and they can all be mixed and matched to create visually and mechanically unique sets of weaponry. Some resources are more common than others, some are even region-based, and each one has its own aesthetic and properties. Base building is also being improved upon, not only in functionality, but also in customization. A new template system is being introduced. with players having the ability to save building templates and share them online. These templates can be physically placed in the world to function as an holographic layout to guide players on what and where to build. A system that highly promotes team building and a massive quality of life change for the dedicated builders. Not only that, there will be a lot of building options to choose from, further enhancing the building customizability, helping players express themselves through their architectural creations. The final aspect of this segment is player progression. Leveling is back, and this time is divided into two kinds: experience and knowledge. Experience points are part of the basic leveling system. By gathering resources, crafting, and killing NPCs and other players, we will get experience points and level up. Knowledge points, however, are part of the new system. These are acquired by completing missions or objectives, as well as challenges, probably addressing the dynamic world events. These points can be spent in a dedicated skill tree that contains active abilities, perks, and passive benefits. I personally find them strange them mentioning perks and passive benefits separately, since they can mean the same thing. But without any examples, it's hard to speculate what which one might be. All these mechanics together will give the player the possibility of creating characters with much deeper specializations than before. A dedicated builder can craft tools specialized in building and repair, spend their knowledge points in building specific perks, or get access to exclusive building materials or components that other niches cannot. Taming-focused players could craft non-lethal weaponry or tools specialized in helping the player restrain or tame the creature, and laser-focus their skill tree in active abilities that facilitate taming or improves taming efficiency. Keep in mind that these two examples were highly speculative, but the features mentioned previously highly promote specialization and mechanical diversity, so things like this can actually be possible. But we will need gameplay footage for that, so until that happens, we can only wait and see. Arc 2 has the potential of drastically improving the game and even placing a new standard in the survival genre. But even though all these new features sound amazing on paper, what's most important is the execution. We can't hide this. Wildcard is hyping this new game a lot. Many of these new mechanics are extremely ambitious, and we need to keep that in mind. We also can't forget how much of wasted potential Arc 1 is, and the utter disappointment that Atlas was. An entire 8-page long list of content was scrapped during Arc's early access. The game suffers from numerous issues that were never fixed. We had to pay for a DLC while the game was still in early access, and the game's price tripled when it launched. These and many other incidents sunk Wildcard's reputation, and now with the sequel, not only they will need to exceed the community's expectations, but also get their reputation back. But I'm a firm believer that people deserve second chances, and the game has been in development for years now, instead of the 7 months the prequel had. Wildcard has the funding, the time, and the team to do this right. So I will keep my expectations in check until I see some actual gameplay, and I would advise you to do the same. Thank you for watching. I'm not an Arc YouTuber, but I will create content based on the sequel every time something new comes up. So if you enjoyed this video and want to watch more Arc content in the future, make sure to subscribe. Also, if you enjoy dinosaur games or dinosaurs in general, give the rest of my content a shot and see what you think. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and the content I create. If you wanna join the ranks, the link will be in the description. Share your thoughts and opinions down below, join our Discord server for memes and paleo nut stuff, and I hope to see you next week.